Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, improve, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Karen Grosz. Hi, Karen.
Good morning. Hello.
Good morning. It's so good to have you here on this podcast. We're going to have a great, fun conversation. Well, it's for sure going to be fun because you have such energy that it's contagious, which is amazing. Such positive energy, because I guess also negative energy can be contagious, but yours is super positive, amazing. And we're going to talk about team building, and we're going to talk about how it relates to processes, which is absolutely incredible. I mean, it totally relates because we're going to talk about how we're going to use those processes in order to make them part of the culture and part of the followed by all. And we definitely have to have a strong team in order to do that. So, Karen, first of all, let's introduce you appropriately. So you are the founder of Canvas Creek Team Building. It's a very it describes exactly what you do, which is team building. So tell us more about yourself and how did you get started with your own company for team building?
Oh, that's a great question. So I always was the person who was sick on the day team building had to happen when I was in corporate America because I thought it was such a waste of time. I'm like, oh, why are we doing this? And just I would find an excuse to get out of it. And about 13, 14 years ago, when I left corporate America, I left for the wrong job. And I asked the universe, I said, oh my gosh, you've got to show me what I'm supposed to be doing. And I came up with this idea of collaborative art. And so that's what we do with Canvas Creek is collaborative art. And now we've done it with over 80,000 people. We work with huge companies and small companies, and we do a ton of work in schools with this process that has 3 stages, which I'm sure we'll talk about someplace here.
I love it. Well, yeah. So basically, what results do you see from doing that activity?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We go through 3 stages. We go through begin when nobody wants to participate, and then we move into become where there's actually you can feel the electricity in the room where they become a stronger team. And then there's 3rd stage is believe, and that is really the power stage, especially for a company that's going through change. The believe stage is when the team looks at their art and it might be kind of ugly or it might be really good, but they realize that they can do absolutely incredible things when they work together. And in the moments after they paint together, they are really, really open and really creative. And so they'll have big conversations about what's going well, what's not going well, how they should interact as a team. And they'll make big promises to one another. And then this is the cool thing, they take the art back to the office with them, and it reminds them of what they can do and what they promised one another. So they continue to believe in one another at a much more visceral basis than they ever did before.
Amazing. Do groups ever come back to do it again?
Yeah, it is kind of a watershed moment where everything changes. There was before Canvas Creek and after Canvas Creek, but a lot of times they'll bring back the rest of their company. When they're making other new changes, they'll come back and do it again. But that first time is really the incredible, super powerful time. But yeah, I work with companies on a continuing basis a lot.
That's amazing. Now, do you find that while they're going through this process, do you find that there will be people that at the beginning they will be much more willing to participate, or you can actually isolate the leaders that will take on, and then those that drag behind, like you were, like in terms of like what you were describing, I don't want to do it. And tell me more about the story of or the changes that you see that are occurring in people as they go through this process.
Yeah, it's a great question. I always think that companies should use us when they're looking at a hiring pool, because when you watch people paint together, you can tell who the leaders are, who the instigators are, and who's just going to stand back and stir paint, which isn't always a bad thing, but we really can tell who people are, and it's not always who you expect. So, in the process, four people stand side by side to create this art, and they have very little instruction, but they have specific roles for themselves on the canvas. And almost everybody is hesitant. We make a joke out of that in the beginning, asking them who wishes they were sick that day, and then who's really excited. And only like a quarter of the people are excited to paint together. And so, Addie, they have to look internal and say, gosh, am I willing to do this for the team? And because of the roles, everybody gets their brush on the canvas. And as soon as they get their brush on the canvas, they start to work. We call it the segmented canvas. So you stand here, I stand here, the next person stands here, and we just work in our little spot. But our process is such that between 7 and 13 minutes, people start to paint on top of one another's art, and they start to move around and they start to touch one another. And when that happens, that's when we really see who is the giving person. They welcome others into the process. Who is it that's going to figure out how to lead the group in silence? Because that's the secret here. All of this is being done in silence. So somebody will figure out how to communicate with grunts and groans and crazy gestures, and they become the leader of the canvas. And it's really fascinating to watch that play out, and then to watch the team figure out when they're done, because we don't tell them when they're done. The team gets to figure it out, and that really is such a power moment.
That's amazing. Do you ever find that they become more playful and they start playing with each other? And yeah.
Oh my gosh. So when I started the company, I knew we were going to have to protect clothing, and I thought aprons aren't enough. And so we got great big white lab smocks, and you'll see those in the pictures on the website. And I thought, gosh, nobody will ever want to get paint on these. So I drew paint at them and painted little circles on the smocks. Well, holy cow, was I wrong. In that become stage, the movements get really big. People paint on one another. If there's alcohol involved, sometimes there's some handprints in places you're like, I don't know if we should be touching butts. But people get really, really playful, and the paint flies. And we protect the room so that when the paint flies, we don't damage the room at all. We have never left a stain anywhere. But yeah, people get so playful. We had one story. Two commissioners, county commissioners, were on a tour, and they were here in Billings, and they let them go through our process. And these two fight with one another all the time, like in public meetings, have big, bold arguments. And we have them laughing and giggling and painting on one another's faces. And for them, they said it was, again, a watershed moment where they changed their relationship because they got to play.
That's amazing. So people come to you, right? I mean, it is done in your studio in Billings, Montana.
So we travel wherever a team needs us. We've traveled all over the country, and we put down tarps and we put plastic on the walls. And it's really cool if we're in a boardroom where people are used to having stuffy meetings, and they walk in and all of a sudden there's tarps on the floor and there's plastic on the walls. You're like, this is going to be different. And that's our point. If you're going to make change, especially to process or procedure, you have to think differently, and to think differently in a space that you're used to being really stoic in, and now you get to throw paint. That's part of the power of the process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, you mentioned processes and procedures, and as you know, that's what we do. We create and document processes, improve them. But the key ingredients is we have to make sure that they're followed by all, right? And I even had a business owner ask me last week, well, how can I ensure that my team actually is going to follow the processes, right? How can I hold them accountable? How would I know that they will actually implement it? And it really has to do a lot with having a great team. And I interviewed several people on my podcast that very successfully implemented processes and procedures in their company. And the number one common denominator is that well, I guess two, but it's a one common denominator. You know, it starts from the top. So the leader is like into it. He definitely wants to make sure, or she, that it is going to be followed by all. And the second component is that the team is holding each other accountable to make sure that those processes and procedures are being followed. what did you find in terms of a successful outcome of all of this activity of building a team? How can that really impact following the procedures and the processes, and even having the initiative of finding improvement?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So when the team starts painting together, again, we talked about this, that they're a little bit hesitant about it. And then they start creating art and they're like, oh, look, I painted an elk and I painted a heart, and they get really proud of that. And if it is, so we can use our process in a variety of different ways, but if we're going to be making changes and implementing new processes, one of the things that we do is create absolute chaos on the canvas. And when that chaos happens, the team gets really angry, which is good. We want that. That's that visceral response. And then they come together and they fix the art. And so we come out of that and we have a conversation about it. What was your response to the change? Are you proud of how you handled that? And how do you want to handle this going forward? What's the conversation you want to have with the team? So I don't like to develop the process and procedures. That's why there's you in the world. I like to get the team ready for that conversation. And what's really cool is that once they've gone through this really traumatic experience where they're like, oh my gosh, our art's ruined. And then, holy cow, look what we fixed together. They realize that change can be really powerful. And they know who's going to have a hard time with it and who's going to help to solve it. And so then they can have big conversations later and say, when they're 1 month in and they're like, oh, Susan, you're not following procedure here. Remember on the day we painted, we figured out that we would hold one another accountable. And so they'll refer back to that art day and say, remember when we painted together, we agreed that we would all adopt these procedures and we would follow them, and you need to step in line. So it's really cool. And they'll do that a lot of times looking at the art, not looking at one another, which again is powerful, that I don't have to look at you and say you're wrong. I can look here and we can have a discussion about it.
Absolutely. I think it's great. Those are very good points. Now, Karen, you're known as the Monday videos. Tell us more about those Monday videos.
So I decided many years ago that I was not going to be morose and depressed. I was going to be happy. And it just by accident, I started making videos that I would put out on Monday and say, oh my gosh, happy Monday. And there was a huge response to those. And so now I start the week, I've got a huge email list that goes out and they're on all of the social media platforms. And it starts with, okay, and I tell a story from my life or a way to look at the world, and I always end with, and I'm so glad that there's you. So these videos have kind of taken on a life of their own, and every time I think people are probably tired of them, I'll quit. Somebody calls me and says, I can't start my week without your cheery voice. But there's also somebody, we have a very good friend, especially, but we've got several of them, but one of them in particular, who calls me about every 3 weeks and says, stop with the happiness. It's too much. I'm like, well, stop watching. It really has become fun. They post at 6:30 in the morning, truly just so that we remember that we get what we expect from the world. And if you expect that it is going to be gloomy Eeyore type of days, that's what you're going to get. And then if you expect happy Monday and you're looking for the light in the world, that's what you're going to find. So that's my little gift to the world, is that Monday nonsense.
That's beautiful. Just beautiful. Wow. I love it. I love it. So Karen, we are definitely going to post your information on the show notes, and I definitely encourage people to reach out to you. I mean, it sounds like a great fun exercise to do with your team to make sure that you are operating as a cohesive team. But also share here on the podcast at this point, like, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, great question. So the link is fabulous. I also am very, pardon me, text and email friendly, so they can just reach out. And if they reach out and tell me that they saw me on your podcast, I'll send them a free copy of my book, Quiet Leadership. So send me an email, tell me that they saw me here, and I will send them that free copy of Quiet Leadership.
Great. So why don't you share your phone number that they can text you?
Great. 406-690-5999.
Very easy to remember. Okay, so now everyone text Karen and get that copy of the book. So let's talk about your book. What is the book about?
So the book is Quiet Leadership, and I looked at how teams were behaving. And during the pandemic, when we were kind of screaming at one another, I thought what we need right now is quiet leadership. And I looked back at my life, all of the leadership lessons that I had learned from my dad, from my grandmother, and from people that I had worked with, and took the very best of their lessons and put them in short chapters, or like 3 to 5 minute chapters that help people, again, look at the world in a different way. A great example is the first leadership lesson I ever learned for quiet leadership was my grandmother, who I was complaining about how I worked harder than my brothers when I was 14 years old. And she said, "Oh, Karen, some people are just blisters. They only show up after all the work is done." So in the book, we take stories like that and turn that into a leadership lesson that we can use in today's world.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, great. Well, Karen, it's been great to have you on this podcast. Great. I love the creativity, and I like how different it is from any other team building. And I love how it gets people to participate. And art is such a beautiful thing that can totally elevate people to a whole new level. Whether you're a great artist or not, it doesn't matter. You're still an artist. Great is like really how you conceive yourself, like if you are or not. But working together with your teammates to do that sounds like a really fun experience. And you make it happy and fun, which is always very, very important in team building or anything else in life.
Yes, thank you for that. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing in the world. Again, I don't want to do the details. I want to throw the paint. So thank you for helping people with process and procedures. It's so important to team happiness.
You are very welcome. All right, Karen, well, thank you so much. And thank you to our listeners for listening.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.